The bullshit piled up so fast in Vietnam, you needed wings to stay above it.
This comment made by Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now is made in opposition to the Vietnam War. Another comment made by the appropriately named Kilgore suggests a contrasting attitude to America's violence in Vietnam.
Napalm, son! Smelled like victory.
They both talk about the Vietnam War, yet have different subjective perspectives. Billions of people have them about an infinite number of subjects, and when it comes to an audience, there are numerous factors that influence this. In this essay, I will discuss how subjective interpretation affects the credibility of a film being able to be called anti-war. I will firstly evidence the political power of the medium of film, countering it at points with McGee, Bayer and Kelman. I will then talk about anti-war films that critiqued their contemporary social climates, specifically the Cold War and the Vietnam War, with support from Lowery and Abrams, and Bogue and Tomasula respectively. And finally, I will conclude with support from Bayer and Swofford on whether I believe anti-war films exist. After the abolition of the Hollywood Production Code, films and directors were shone in a different light to the propaganda vehicles the public's eyes had known them as. In the late 60s to mid-70s, many Eastern European films and filmmakers, due to their social critiques, were blacklisted, denied distribution, or pressured to emigrate in order to maintain employment. The fact that governments felt the need to bar these films and filmmakers is a testament to film's political power amongst the people. However, not every person does or will engage with a film in a positively political manner. In fact, McGee says that in order to have a positive political effect, a viewer must actively embrace others' thoughts and intentions, even if they are different to their own. And for this reason, there is no guarantee that a viewer will share the vision of the creator. However, given the multiplicity of factors that Bayer lists, to pedestal critical thought as the cause of positive political impact, although logically sound, is somewhat a reductionist take, especially when considering Kelman's theory of compliance in relation to a viewer and a film's desired political impact. For the meantime, I will analyse how films have critiqued their contemporary social climates, as history is a prominent socio-cultural code that affects a film's critical reception.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
In 1964, whilst tensions between Western and Soviet powers raged on, Stanley Kubrick released Dr. Strangelove, a satiric black comedy emerging as a rare and strong voice for ending the madness of nuclear confrontation. Lowery 2003 states Dr. Strangelove is Kubrick's satirization of an absurd paradox emerging from powers with nuclear arsenals. Seem too weak and you invite attacks, seem too strong and you provoke attacks. He felt finding this balance linked to identity and masculinity, and thus developed both the Soviet and American adversaries primarily as incompetents, womanizers, or both. Lowery continues that Kubrick felt the reality of nuclear destruction was not comprehended by the public, by fault of government's misrepresentations of control, and decided on a satire to emancipate them to the potential and in fact entirely possible dangers. There were several concerns from MPAA and Production Code Administration head Jeffrey Sherlock over audience reception to The End of the World. Some actors refused the roles available, regarding the source material derogatorily as too liberal, and Lowery considers that Columbia Pictures were cautious not to make un-American films. These debates reinforce the idea of Dr. Strangelove as a critique of nuclear policy, and its ending, filled with nuclear stock footage, poses a brilliant illustration of war as a cyclical and never-ending game.
Someday this war's gonna end.
Of the Vietnam War films, Apocalypse Now, 1979, is often praised as the most seminal depiction. Coppola himself said in an interview,
"My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." Vietnam.
Like Dr. Strangelove, Apocalypse Now depicts incompetents as those who are for the violence of the war, in particular Colonel Kilgore. One moment he offers his flask to a dying man, the next he yanks it away at the news of his favourite surfer's arrival. In 1981, at the start of his article, Bogue termed him a caricature of the military mentality, and rather ironically, he finished it by calling him a renegade who strikes without orders, a would-be god, a pyromaniac, a racist, and a Nazi. But, unlike Dr. Strangelove, Tomasula says, 1990, pages 145 to 158, that Apocalypse Now was written to pander to both anti- and pro-war sides. He says it depicts the lunacy in America's Vietnam policies, whilst also focusing on American power and casualties, making the Vietnamese faceless or ant-like in the Rise of the Valkyrie sequence, or having Willard, the character the audience identifies with, admire Kurtz's military prowess.
Like they said, he had an impressive career, maybe too impressive.
It is these double binds and mixed messages, Tomasula says, that attempt to play both sides. This brings me to my final point. In the case of Dr. Strangelove, the arguments that it is not an anti-war film could be that, as a comedy, could it not be seen as light-hearted and thus critically engaged with less? This question is increasingly relevant by today's standards, where a mass culture surrounds the idea of comfort viewing films or TV, which, through critical disengagement, help to emotionally deregulate. Or to quote Sweeney, 2024, comfort viewing allowed fans to remain optimistic when pessimism threatened to set in. In this context, there was a trend toward watching shows with easy viewing qualities to quell emotional distress. Another question is, could the final sequence, instead of a warning to the danger of impending cyclical doom, be treated by an American, military-minded man as an insult to the integrity of the United States? Evidenced inversely by Anthony Swofford, who says that filmic images of death and carnage are pornography for the military man. The argument here is that the creator intent and political effect do not align. We can dilute this argument using Apocalypse Now. If it is, as Tomasulo says, that the script is meant to pander, does the fact that there are pro-war aspects to be adored negate the existence of its anti-war aspects? Which side of the creator intent is correct? If one viewer feels the murder of Kurtz was a quench for viewer bloodlust, and another, like Tomasulo claims, thinks it is an identity-driven absolution meant to show how weathered Willard has become, is the latter's opinion invalidated because of the former's?
Yeah? What do you have to say?
I will conclude by saying that I think whether anti-war films exist depends on the definition of exist. The arguments for their existence evidence the film's intention and effect aligning, whereas the arguments against take the term exist to mean universal. Bayer claims that it is tautologically necessary to make a war film in order to make an anti-war film. And this is true. Subjective interpretation, he goes on to say, is a process that lies beyond the creator's sphere of influence. But this does not mean that anti-war films do not exist. It simply means that they do not exist for some.